This article is about the Scottish poet. For other people of this name, see William Dunbar. William Dunbar was a Scottish makar poet active in the late 15th century and the early 16th century. He was closely associated with the court of King James IV and produced a large body of work in Scots, distinguished by its great variation in themes and literary styles. He was likely a native of East Lothian, as assumed from a satirical reference in the Flyting of Dunbar and Kennedie. His surname is also spelled Dummer. Biography. Dunbar first appears in the historical record in 1474 as a new student, a determinant of the Faculty of Arts at the University of St Andrews. Since the customary age for entering a Scottish university at this time was 14, a birth date of 1459 or 1460 has been assumed. At St Andrews, he obtained a bachelor's degree in 1477 and a master's degree in 1479. Details from his later life suggest that he was ordained as a priest at some point, but the date is unknown. In 1491 and 1492 Dunbar accompanied an embassy to Denmark and France in an unknown capacity. In 1501 and 1502 he participated in an embassy to England in the staff of Andrew Forman, Bishop of Moray. From 1500 the poet was employed at the court of King James in a role for which he received an annual pension. His duties are not recorded. He is referred to only as a servitor or a servant, but it is to this period that the bulk of his poetry can be dated. Several of Dunbar's poems were included in the Chapman and Makar prints of 1508, the first books to be printed in Scotland. In 1510, his pension was set at the substantial annual sum of £80 Scots. In comparison, Dunbar's contemporary Hector Boyce received an annual salary of £26.13 for his role as Principal of King's College, Aberdeen. The last reliable reference to Dunbar is in the Treasurer's accounts for May 1513, where he is recorded receiving a payment of his pension. James died at Flyting in September of the same year. In the dislocation that followed, the Treasurer's accounts ceased for a period and, when resumed in 1515, Dunbar is no longer recorded as being employed by the Crown. A poem, When the Governor Passed in France, describing the departure of the Regent Albany for France in 1517, is attributed to Dunbar in the Maitland manuscripts, suggesting that he was still active at the time. But in Sir David Lindsay's work The Testament and Complaint of the Papimgo of 1530, Dunbar is referred to as being deceased. The exact date of his death remains unknown. Dunbar's poetry. William Dunbar's poetry contained a wide variety of subjects, moods and metres. He wrote many devout religious works and noble courtly pieces, but he also produced comic pieces which often made use of scurrilous elements and uninhibited language. Commemorative and occasional works. Some of Dunbar's poems were clearly commissioned to mark public events. His allegory The Thistle and the Wire commemorated the marriage of Margaret of England to King James in 1503, while the eulogy to Bernard Stewart, Lord of Albany, welcomed the arrival of a distinguished Franco-Scottish soldier as the French ambassador in 1508. Local events were also marked, such as the visit of Queen Margaret to the blithe and blissful borough of Aberdeen in 1511. Religious and moral works. Dunbar was an ordained priest of the pre-Reformation Church, and several of his works have religious subject matter. Roar 8 Celida Super of the Passion of Christ and Done is a battle on the Dragon Black deal with the Nativity, Passion and Resurrection respectively. Ain Ballad of Our Lady is a hymn in praise of Mary the Virgin. The Table of Confession discusses sin and confession. Poems with a secular moral theme also occur in his work, such as of Deming and the trilogy of short pieces of Discretion in Asking, of Discretion in Giving and of Discretion in Taking. Court entertainment. Many of the poet's pieces appear to provide entertainment for the king, the queen and his fellow courtiers, with comic elements as a recurring theme. The well-known A Dance in the Quernus Charmer is a comic satire of court life. The notorious Flyting with Kennedie was an exchange of outrageous poetic insults with his fellow makar Walter Kennedy, while the Dance of the Seven Deadly Sins is a series of comic scenes set in hell. Poems in the tradition of courtly love are represented in Dunbar's work, including a short lyric Swiatwar Vertive and the extended allegory The Golden Taj. Other court entertainments were more personal. Of James Dog and its sequel He is Na Dog, He is a Lamb describe the poet's dealings with the keeper of the Queen's wardrobe. Satires and commentary on public life. A recurring theme in Dunbar's work is satire. He satirized colleagues of whom he disapproved, such as in the Fenyaid Friar of Tungland, and he urged the burgesses of Edinburgh to show greater civic pride into the merchantess of Edinburgh. Tidings fra the Session soon criticized corruption in the Court of Session, petitions to the king and personal affairs. William Dunbar was willing to reveal his personal affairs in his poetry, and a number of his works are petitions to the king asking for personal advancement. He often requested to be appointed to an office in the church, which he refers to as a benefice. A typical example is Quana Moni Benefices Vacit. On other occasions his requests were more modest. In the petition of the Grey Horse, Old Dunbar the poet asked the king for a new suit of clothes to mark Christmas. The poem Sure Ye Have Money Serviturus makes clear his comparative value to the king and country. Elsewhere, Dunbar seemed to reveal other aspects of his private life. Lament for the Makars is a reflection on mortality in which he remembers his fellow poets now deceased. Meditation in Winter considers aging and the poet's frustrated ambitions, while on his Hidake is apparently an attempt to excuse a lack of productivity by recounting a migraine. Work and influence. Dunbar's reputation among his immediate successors was considerable. By later criticism, stimulated in some measure by Scott's eulogy that he is unrivaled by any which Scotland has produced, he has held the highest place among the makars. 101 poems have been ascribed to Dunbar. Of these at least 90 are generally accepted as his. Of the 11 attributed to him, it would be hard to say that they should not be considered authentic. Most that has clung to his verse tale the Frères of Berwick, so much so that it seems unlikely that he was the author. The only copy manuscript of this text is in French, and although the style is very close to that of Dunbar's, it is unlikely that he was the author of this anonymous text. Dunbar's chief allegorical poems are the Golden Taj and the Thistle and the War. The motif of the former is the poet's futile endeavor in a dream to ward off Dame Beauty's arrows by reasons shelled of gold. Quote, when wounded and made prisoner, he discovers the true beauty of the lady. When she leaves him, he is handed over to heaviness. The noise of the ship's guns, as the company sails off, wakes the poet to the real pleasures of a May morning. Dunbar works on the same theme in a shorter poem, known as Beauty and the Prisoner. The Thistle and the War is a prothalamium in honor of King James and Queen Margaret. The greater part of Dunbar's work is occasional, personal and social satire, complaints, orisons and pieces of a humorous character. His best-known orison, usually remembered as Timor Mortis Conturbat Me, which is repeated as the fourth line of each verse, is titled Lament for the Makars and takes the form of a prayer in memory of the medieval Scots poets. The humorous works show Dunbar at his finest. The best specimen of this work, of which the outstanding characteristics are sheer whimsicality and topsy-turvy humor, is the Ballad of Kynd Kittock. This strain runs throughout many of the occasional poems, and is not wanting in odd passages in Dunbar's contemporaries, and it has the additional interest of showing a direct historical relationship with the work work of later Scottish poets, and chiefly with that of Robert Burns. Dunbar's satire often becomes invective. Examples of this type are the satire on Edinburgh, the general satire, the epitaph on Donaldera, and the powerful vision of the Dance of the Seven Daedalus Sinis. Two satirical ballads lampoon a colleague at court, the would-be aviator John Damien, in the Flyting of Dunbar and Kennedie, an outstanding specimen of a favourite northern form, analogous to the continental estrif or tenzone. He and his rival reach a height of scurrility which is certainly without parallel in English literature. This poem has the additional interest of showing the antipathy between the Scots-speaking inhabitants of the Lothians and the Gaelic-speaking folk of Carrick, in southern Ayrshire, where Walter Kennedy was from. Back to Dunbar. For the Scottish literary renaissance in the mid-20th century, Dunbar was a touchstone. Many tried to imitate his style and highbrow subject matter, such as Hugh MacDiarmid and Sidney Goodsir Smith. As MacDiarmid himself said, they had to go back to Dunbar. To make Dunbar more accessible to the modern reader, selected poems of William Dunbar. An interlinear translation was published by Lawrence Siegler in 2010. Dunbar is commemorated in Makar's Court, outside the Writers' Museum, Laundmarket, Edinburgh.